Hi, this is Dan Curtis with Nomad Capitalist. Today we are here with Jesse Day. Jesse is the host of Commodity Culture, a YouTube channel that is dedicated to all things commodity driven. Jesse, welcome to the channel. Thanks.
Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of Nomad Capitalist, so it's a real honor to be on the show.
We're going to dive right in and ask you a couple questions about commodities. Interest rates are rising, stocks are falling. What kind of bearing does that have on the commodities market in general?
That's a big question. I think in the short term, you're going to see commodities, specifically the equities like commodity stocks, dropping along with the broader market as we've already seen. So I think in the short term, you're going to see a lot of pain in the broader markets. I also think there's a lot more pain to come, and that will affect commodities in the short term. However, commodities right now, I believe, or are at the early stages of a decade-long bull cycle. So I do think for those with a long-term perspective, for those who don't trade in and out of the market, the supply-demand fundamentals for commodities are just so unbelievably strong right now that eventually the equities will decouple from the broader market, in my opinion. We've already seen some of that with oil. The oil price obviously has been very volatile. That's a commodity I like a lot for the future. But I think short term, we're going to see pain. Long term, we're going to see a tremendous bull run ahead, depending on the commodity.
So, when you talk about pain, is there a point where you see us bottoming out in terms of commodities?
In terms of commodities, again, it depends on the commodity because there's so many different ones, and I do think that we, again, depending on the commodity, we will see a bottoming in a lot of the commodities coming up here, simply because the supply demand fundamentals are just too strong for a lot of these things. Talking about oil specifically, the amount of underinvestment that has happened in that sector is crazy. The whole commodities complex actually has been massively underinvested in for the past decade or so. And when it comes to this whole new green economy, this push for a carbon neutral future, what a lot of people don't realize is the amount of commodities needed to make that happen do not exist on Earth today, not by a long shot. The amount of mining of various minerals and commodities that are needed to even make half of what's being proposed a reality is massive. And the problem is the same environmentalists and woke politicians who are, pushing for this new green economy are the same ones who are implementing all these ESG mandates to stop people from starting mines. So you've got this insane dichotomy that doesn't even make sense. Eventually, that's going to break, and I think it's going to break in these years up ahead. I don't know exactly when commodities will bottom in that sense, and the truth will kind of set in for the supply demand fundamentals, but it is coming and probably within the next few years.
Okay, okay. Well, and it's funny. You talk about commodities in terms of mining and in terms of oil and uranium. When most people think of commodities, they instantly go to gold and silver. But I understand you're bullish on a number of other commodities. Is there anything you're particularly high on right now?
Yes, and I do want to say one thing about gold and silver is that gold is more of a monetary metal. So I wouldn't call gold a commodity simply because it's has such few industrial applications. So it's more of it's real money. It's hard money, and I think that's a very important asset to own in times like these when we're seeing destruction of fiat currencies across the board. Silver is very unique in that it is kind of 50% approximately industrial and 50% a monetary metal. So I'm also bullish on gold and silver, but moving away from the precious metals, as I mentioned earlier, oil and gas and uranium are probably the two commodities categories that I'm most bullish on. I'll start with uranium and why I'm bullish on that. Uh, there's been a massive shift in both political and public sentiment when it comes to nuclear power over the last few years. The ghosts of Chernobyl and Fukushima, there's still a lot of people who have misguided ideas about nuclear power. Those were very rare incidents. Chernobyl was a joint power plant and nuclear weapons manufacturing facility. It had an extremely flawed reactor design, and it was being run by communist Soviets who really had no idea what they were doing. I talk about that in depth in a documentary I did on uranium on my channel if people want to check that out. But we're now seeing a real shift where we're even seeing environmental groups getting behind nuclear. We're seeing the political class get behind nuclear, and people are starting to wake up to the realization that to ever get to this carbon neutral future, this new green economy, we're going to require nuclear and uranium. I think it's the most important power source. What a lot of people also don't realize is it is basically the safest energy source on planet Earth. People point to these few disasters, but when you look at the deaths that have been directly attributed to nuclear energy, I think only wind and solar are anywhere close. It's basically nuclear, wind, and solar that are neck and neck for the bottom position of the least deaths by energy generation. So people don't understand that. We're seeing reactors being built out all around the world right now. More and more countries are getting on board. China alone has 150 nuclear reactors being planned. They have around 20 under construction right now. Worldwide, there's a bunch being planned as well. So this is a reality. The new nuclear renaissance is upon us, and the incentive price to mine uranium is not there yet. The cost of uranium is currently below the incentive price to bring it out of the ground. Now, that alone is massively, massively bullish. So the price has to go up for all of this to happen. There's a number of interesting catalysts. One in particular that has developed recently is an ETF called the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust. So what this ETF does is it actually buys and stores physical uranium in warehouses around the world. And so when you buy a share in this ETF, you're actually buying a certain amount of physical uranium, which is allocated to you. And what the people who run the ETF have been doing is just buying up pounds, excess inventory on the spot market. And so any excess inventory that was left over post Fukushima disaster, which is when uranium entered a bear market, a lot of that has been used up and is now also being hoovered up by the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust. These factors and many more, I could go on forever about it, are what make uranium a winning trade to me in the years ahead.
Well, and I'm sure that what is happening in Ukraine right now is doing nothing but stoking some of those fears about nuclear reactors and the issues that might surround a meltdown with one of those. Um, so we talked about a number of different countries. Do you see countries around the world that are particularly friendly to commodities traders or commodity trades?
I think when it comes, I can only speak to the extractive side of the industry, so mining. That's my area of expertise is in the actual mining companies themselves, and not necessarily the futures market and things like that. But for jurisdictions that are friendly to mining for commodities, I think Africa is a big one. When it comes to uranium, and specifically Namibia and Niger are both great jurisdictions. I think the United States is also a good jurisdiction for both uranium and oil. Now, it might not look that way when it comes to oil these days because of the rhetoric coming out of the Democratic Party at the moment. But they're doing insane things like draining the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is extraordinarily dangerous, just to bring gasoline prices down before the midterm elections. But because of the way America is set up, where different states can kind of implement their own laws and regulations around the mining industry, you have some very mining friendly jurisdictions in the US, such as Wyoming and Texas, for all commodities. So I think aside from those two jurisdictions specifically, I mean, Uzbekistan's one as well, although very hard to get access to. Kazakhstan, same thing. But I will say, I think the most important thing for an investor in the commodity space is to be geographically diversified. So you never want to put all your eggs in one basket in terms of saying, well, Africa looks great, Niger looks great, for example. I'm going to put all my money in uranium companies there. The same goes with areas that have a so-called rule of law. For example, in Canada, we have the Athabasca Basin in Saskatchewan. It is the Saudi Arabia of uranium. It has the highest grades of uranium in the world, the best deposits by a long shot. So a lot of the major players are located there, and a lot of the promising up and coming companies are also located there. However, Canada is known for being a particularly stable jurisdiction, but as we've seen recently with the freezing of bank accounts, a lot of heavy rhetoric coming from the government about shutting down big oil, making them pay their share. There's always the possibility moving forward that the uranium industry could come under fire. And not only that, the amount of permitting times, red tape, ESG mandates that are in Canada can be insane. It can take decades to get this stuff resolved. So I think the important thing is to be geographically diversified.
Well, and speaking to regulations in Canada, you have a personal story that involves Canadian freedoms and some personal freedoms that I know you've been going through. You care to share the details of your move?
Yeah, so I relocated from Vancouver to Zagreb in Croatia, where I'm currently located. And that came about simply because I saw the Canadian government moving to an authoritarian and, frankly, some could even say fascist direction. It's still insane, although most restrictions have been lifted. The current Prime Minister, Trudeau, got reelected last year. It's kind of the sign that I really needed to get out of there. I'd been planning to leave already once they implemented a passport system in society that you needed to show your medical papers to have a beer or, go watch a hockey game. That's when I checked out and realized that most Canadians were totally fine with it and I was not. And so that's when I first started to consider leaving the country. I started to do research on all the countries that were open. What were the laws in society? What were the politicians saying? What did the political landscape look like? And that research led me to discover Croatia. And so I've been here almost a year now, and I often say that it's the best decision I ever made in my life.
Well, everybody has a catalyst, right? How has that move, if it has at all, affected your business or your ability to trade commodities?
Um, well, I would say for one thing, it's given me a much clearer head because the society here, it's just such a stark contrast to Canada. There are and this we have a problem particularly in Vancouver with mentally ill people who are addicted to substances and have nowhere to go, and that issue is not being addressed at all, and it's getting worse. It's spreading throughout the city and to the border towns around it. You do not have any of that here. You do not have wokeism here. um, Everybody seems to be on the same page in society. People are interested in family values. People are interested in their religion, Catholicism. I'm not personally religious, but I think that it's a glue that holds society together here. So I'd say the peace of mind is the greatest benefit that allows me to be a better investor, allows me to run my YouTube channel. So I think it's clarity of mind that has been the greatest benefit.
Well, we always espouse going where you're treated best, and it sounds like you found that place. Uh, Jesse, we appreciate your story and we appreciate your time. I will tell people you can check Jesse out at Commodity Culture. Again, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and we wish you the best in Croatia.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thank you.